Sarah Martinez had always been the girl who ran everywhere. While other children walked to school, she sprinted. When her friends took the bus to the mall, she jogged alongside it, arriving with barely a breath out of place. Her mother often joked that Sarah had been born with springs in her shoes, but what seemed like boundless energy to others was actually something much deeper. Growing up in a small town in Oregon, Sarah didn't have access to fancy training facilities or renowned coaches. Her high school track was more dirt than proper surface, with lanes marked by faded white paint that disappeared entirely after heavy rains. The hurdles were old and mismatched, some higher than others, creating an obstacle course that would have horrified Olympic officials. But for Sarah, this imperfect track became her sanctuary. Every morning at 5:30, before the sun painted the mountains in shades of gold, Sarah would slip out of her house and make her way to the track. Her worn-out running shoes had holes near the toes, and her shorts were hand-me-downs from her older brother. But none of that mattered. What mattered was the feeling she got when her feet hit the ground in perfect rhythm, when her breathing synchronized with her stride, when the world around her became a blur of motion and possibility. Coach Henderson had been watching Sarah run for months before he finally approached her. He was an old-school coach, the kind who believed in hard work over fancy equipment, in determination over natural talent. He had seen plenty of fast kids come and go over his 30 years of coaching, but there was something different about the way Sarah moved. She didn't just run fast, she ran with purpose, as if every step was taking her toward something important. "You've got something special," he told her one afternoon as she finished her usual 5-mile loop around the town. "But raw talent only gets you so far. You need proper training, real competition, and goals that scare you a little bit." Sarah wiped the sweat from her forehead and looked at this weathered man who had just put words to feelings she couldn't express. She had always known she was fast, but in a town where the biggest athletic achievement was making it to the regional basketball playoffs, there wasn't much context for her speed. "What kind of goals?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Coach Henderson smiled, recognizing the hunger in her eyes that separated true athletes from casual runners. "The kind that make people say it's impossible. The kind that require you to bet everything on yourself when nobody else believes in you." That conversation changed everything. What had been casual morning runs became structured training sessions. Sarah learned about interval training, about pacing, about the mental game that separated good runners from great ones. She discovered that running wasn't just about moving fast. It was about strategy, endurance, and the ability to push through barriers that seemed insurmountable. The first real test came during the regional qualifying meet 6 months later. Sarah had been training religiously, following every instruction Coach Henderson gave her, pushing her body to limits she didn't know existed. But training alone in a small town was different from competing against runners who had been groomed for success since elementary school. When Sarah walked onto the track at the regional meet, she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on her. Other competitors wore matching team uniforms with their school logos prominently displayed. They had matching spikes, warm-up suits, and an air of confidence that came from years of competitive experience. Sarah wore her old high school uniform, slightly faded from too many washes, and shoes that she had saved for months to afford. The other runners barely glanced in her direction. Why would they? She was from a school they had never heard of, coached by a man who wasn't on any recruiting radar, representing a program that hadn't produced a standout athlete in decades. Sarah was invisible, unremarkable, easy to overlook. But as she settled into her starting position for the 1,500-meter race, Sarah felt a familiar calm wash over her. This was the feeling she had been chasing in all those early morning runs, the sense that she was exactly where she belonged. The track surface was perfect, unlike the patchy dirt she was used to. The lanes were clearly marked, the hurdles properly set. For the first time, Sarah would be running under ideal conditions. The starter raised his gun, and the chatter from the stands faded to silence. Sarah closed her eyes for just a moment, thinking about all the mornings she had dragged herself out of bed, all the miles she had logged when nobody was watching, all the dreams she had whispered to herself as she ran through empty streets. When the gun fired, Sarah didn't explode from the starting line like some of the other runners. Coach Henderson had taught her patience, had explained that races were won in the final 400 meters, not the first 100. She settled into fourth place as the pack rounded the first turn, content to watch and wait. The pace was faster than anything she had experienced in training. The lead runners were setting a blistering speed that would have left Sarah gasping for air just a year earlier. But months of disciplined training had transformed her body and her mind. She felt strong, controlled, ready for whatever the race would demand. As they passed the 800-meter mark, Sarah was still in fourth place, but something was changing. The runners ahead of her were beginning to show signs of fatigue. Their smooth strides were becoming labored. Their arms were swinging wider. Their breathing was becoming more desperate. Sarah, meanwhile, felt like she was just getting started. Coach Henderson had drilled into her the importance of the third lap, the moment when races truly began. "That's when you'll find out what you're made of," he had told her countless times. "That's when the real athletes separate themselves from the pretenders." With 600 meters to go, Sarah made her move. She pulled out of fourth place and began closing the gap on the leaders. The crowd, which had been politely applauding, suddenly took notice. Who was this unknown runner making a charge from the back of the pack? Sarah could hear Coach Henderson shouting from the infield, his voice cutting through the noise of the crowd. "Now, Sarah, this is your moment. Show them what small-town speed looks like." With 300 meters remaining, Sarah pulled into second place. The runner ahead of her was a highly recruited athlete from the state capital, someone who had been featured in the local sports section multiple times. Someone who was expected to win easily and move on to the state championship. But expectations meant nothing to Sarah. All that mattered was the next step, the next breath, the next surge forward. With 200 meters to go, she pulled even with the leader. The crowd was on its feet now, sensing that something special was happening. The final 100 meters felt like both an eternity and an instant. Sarah could feel every muscle in her body screaming for relief, could feel her lungs burning with the effort of maintaining her pace. But she could also feel something else, the absolute certainty that this was her moment. She crossed the finish line 3 steps ahead of the favored runner, her time posting on the scoreboard moments later. It wasn't just a personal best, it was a school record, a regional record, and a time that would have placed in the top 3 at the state championship the year before. As Sarah bent over, trying to catch her breath, she felt Coach Henderson's hand on her shoulder. "That," he said with a grin, "was just the beginning." The local newspaper ran a small story about the unexpected winner from the unknown school. But most people who hadn't been at the meet never heard about Sarah's breakthrough performance. In the world of high school athletics, regional meets rarely made headlines unless something truly spectacular happened. But for Sarah, everything had changed. She had tasted what it felt like to compete at the highest level, to push her body beyond what seemed possible, to silence doubts with pure performance. The girl who had been running alone on a dirt track had announced herself as a serious competitor. More importantly, she had caught the attention of people who mattered in the running world. College scouts who had come to watch other athletes found themselves making notes about the unknown girl who had stolen the show. Suddenly, Sarah Martinez was no longer invisible. The drive home from the regional meet was quiet but charged with possibility. Coach Henderson knew he had witnessed something special, but he also knew that this was just the first chapter in what could be an extraordinary story. Sarah stared out the window at the familiar landscape of her small town, but everything looked different now. She was no longer just the girl who ran everywhere. She was a runner with a future, an athlete with potential, a competitor who had proven she belonged on any track in the country. But the biggest tests were still ahead, and Sarah was just beginning to understand how high she could climb. The foundation had been laid through years of solitary training and unwavering dedication. The first breakthrough had been achieved against athletes who had every advantage she lacked. Now, as Sarah prepared for the state championship, she was about to discover that her journey toward greatness was far from over. In fact, it was just getting started. The weeks following Sarah's regional victory brought changes she had never anticipated. For the first time in her life, people knew her name. Students who had never spoken to her before suddenly wanted to walk with her between classes. Teachers who had barely acknowledged her presence began asking about her training and offering encouragement. The local coffee shop even put up a small sign congratulating her on making it to state. But with recognition came pressure, and pressure was something Sarah had never had to handle before. When she was running anonymously on her dirt track, every step was for herself. Every improvement was personal progress. Now people were watching, expecting. Coach Henderson noticed the change immediately. Sarah's training sessions, which had always been marked by focused intensity, began showing signs of tension. She was trying too hard, pushing beyond what her training plan called for, attempting to recreate the magic of her regional performance every single day. "You're thinking too much," he told her one afternoon as she struggled through what should have been an easy recovery run. Running isn't about thinking. It's about feeling, reacting, trusting your preparation. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead and looked at her coach with frustration in her eyes. "Everyone expects me to run fast now. What if I can't do it again? What if that race was just luck?" Coach Henderson had seen this before, the way success could become its own burden. He had watched talented athletes crumble under expectations, seen promising careers derailed by the fear of not living up to a single great performance. "Let me tell you something about that regional race," he said, his voice taking on the serious tone he reserved for important lessons. "It wasn't luck. It was 4 years of running when nobody was watching, 6 months of structured training, and 30 years of preparing for a moment you didn't even know was coming. That's not luck. That's readiness meeting opportunity." The state championship was being held at the University of Oregon, on the legendary Hayward Field where American distance running legends had set records and made history. For Sarah, who had spent her entire running career on substandard tracks, the idea of competing on such hallowed ground was both thrilling and intimidating. When they arrived in Eugene 2 days before the meet, Sarah felt overwhelmed by everything she saw. The warm-up track was better than the best track she had ever raced on. The main stadium was filled with banners commemorating achievements that seemed impossible to a small-town runner. Athletes from powerhouse programs moved with the confidence that came from years of elite competition. Sarah's hotel room was modest compared to the accommodations some teams enjoyed, but it felt like luxury to her. She spread her racing gear on the bed and stared at her spikes, trying to convince herself that she belonged in the same race as runners who had been featured in national magazines. Her event was scheduled for Friday afternoon, the second day of competition. Sarah spent Thursday watching other races, studying the way elite high school athletes carried themselves, observing the rituals they followed before competing. Some runners seemed completely relaxed, chatting casually with teammates and coaches. Others were intensely focused, going through elaborate warm-up routines and visualization exercises. Sarah wasn't sure which approach was right for her. She had never been to a meet of this magnitude, never experienced the controlled chaos of a major championship. Everything was louder, faster, more intense than anything in her previous experience. That evening, Coach Henderson took her for a quiet dinner away from the meet venue. They talked about anything except running, her plans for college, her family, the books she had been reading. It was exactly what Sarah needed, a reminder that she was more than just an athlete, that her worth wasn't measured solely by how fast she could cover 1,500 meters. "Tomorrow," Coach Henderson said as they walked back to the hotel, "you're going to line up against the best high school distance runners in the state. Some of them have been groomed for this moment since middle school. Some of them have college scholarships already locked up. Some of them have run times that are faster than yours." Sarah felt her stomach tighten as he listed all the advantages her competitors possessed. "But here's what none of them have," he continued. "None of them have run alone on a dirt track for years, developing the mental toughness that comes from self-motivation. None of them have had to create their own opportunities the way you have. None of them have learned to find speed when there was nobody else to run with, nobody else to push them." They stopped in front of the hotel and Coach Henderson turned to face his athlete. "Those other girls are fast, and they're well-trained, and they deserve to be here. But tomorrow isn't about who has the best facilities or the most experience. Tomorrow is about who wants it most when everything is on the line." Sarah slept better that night than she had expected. When she woke up Friday morning, the butterflies in her stomach had settled into a familiar pre-race calm. She had felt this way before. Her regional breakthrough, this sense of being exactly where she was meant to be. The warm-up felt different on a perfect track with ideal weather conditions. Sarah's legs felt springy and responsive. Her breathing was easy and controlled. Coach Henderson watched her go through her routine with satisfaction. This was the Sarah he had been training for months, the athlete who had surprised everyone at regionals. As race time approached, Sarah joined the other competitors for the official warm-up on the main track. Hayward Field was filling with spectators, and the atmosphere was electric. Sarah had never run in front of more than a few hundred people, but thousands of fans were settling into their seats for the day's competition. The other runners in her race looked exactly as she had expected: tall, lean, confident, moving with the fluid efficiency that marked elite distance runners. Sarah recognized several faces from photos she had seen in running magazines. These were athletes who had been competing at the national level, runners who were considered locks for major college programs. During the call-room procedure, where athletes gathered before being escorted to the track, Sarah found herself sitting next to Amanda Peterson, the defending state champion and heavy favorite to repeat. Amanda was everything Sarah was not: polished, experienced, supremely confident in her abilities. "First time at state?" Amanda asked, glancing at Sarah's relatively simple uniform. "Yes," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's intense," Amanda said with a knowing smile. "The key is to not get caught up in the moment. Stick to your race plan and trust your training." Sarah appreciated the advice, even though it came from someone who would be trying to beat her in less than an hour. There was a camaraderie among distance runners that transcended competition, a shared understanding of what it took to excel in such a demanding sport. When they were called to the track, Sarah felt the full weight of the moment. The stadium noise was overwhelming, the bright lights made everything feel surreal, and the pressure of performing on such a stage was unlike anything she had experienced. But as she settled into her lane for the pre-race introductions, Sarah caught sight of Coach Henderson in the stands. He was holding a small handmade sign that read, "Small Town Speed," and grinning with pride. In that moment, all the nervousness fell away. This wasn't about proving herself to strangers or living up to expectations she had never set for herself. This was about honoring the work she had put in, the faith her coach had shown in her, and the dreams she had carried through thousands of miles of solitary training. The race was called to its marks, and Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the same calm she had discovered on that dirt track back home. When she opened them again, she was no longer thinking about being the underdog or the unknown runner from a small town. She was simply ready to run, ready to find out what was possible, when years of preparation met the opportunity of a lifetime. The starting gun was raised, and Sarah Martinez prepared to announce herself to the entire state of Oregon. Everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed about during those early morning training sessions, was about to be decided in the next 4 minutes. Sarah had never felt more ready for anything in her life. The gun fired, and the race for the state championship began. For Sarah, it felt like everything she had ever done had been leading to this moment. She was about to discover that sometimes the biggest victories come from the most unexpected places. As she settled into the early pace, Sarah felt the familiar rhythm take over. This was what she had been born to do, what she had been preparing for without even knowing it. The girl from the dirt track was about to show the entire state what small-town determination could accomplish on the biggest stage of her young career. The starting gun's echo had barely faded when Sarah realized she was in a completely different kind of race than anything she had experienced before. The pace was blistering from the first step, faster than even her regional breakthrough. The field moved as one fluid mass, 8 of the best high school distance runners in Oregon setting a rhythm that would have left most athletes gasping within the first 400 meters. Sarah settled into 6th place as they completed the first turn, a position that felt both comfortable and strategic. Coach Henderson had drilled into her the importance of staying relaxed early, of not getting caught up in the emotional energy that often led runners to start too fast. But even her controlled effort felt more intense than anything she had experienced. Amanda Peterson, the defending champion, had taken the early lead with the confidence of someone who had been in this position before. Her stride was smooth and efficient, her breathing controlled despite the aggressive pace. 2 runners from Portland's most successful program flanked her, their matching uniforms and synchronized movements a testament to their shared training and experience. Behind them ran Jessica Chen from Eugene, a junior who had already committed to Stanford and was considered the future of Oregon distance running. Her technique was flawless, her racing tactics refined through years of high-level competition. She moved with the patience of someone who knew exactly when and how to make her decisive move. Sarah found herself running alongside 2 other competitors she didn't recognize, athletes from schools she had never heard of, but who clearly belonged at this level. The field was deep with talent, deeper than she had anticipated. This wasn't going to be a race where one or two runners separated themselves early. This was going to be a tactical battle that would be decided in the final meters. The first 400 meters passed in 68 seconds, a time that made Sarah's eyes widen slightly. That was faster than her PR pace, and they were treating it like a warm-up. She glanced around at the other runners and saw no signs of distress, no indication that anyone was struggling with the aggressive early speed. Coach Henderson stood at the 600-meter mark, his voice cutting through the stadium noise as Sarah passed. "Perfect position. Stay patient. Your time is coming." His words carried the confidence he had shown throughout her development, the unwavering belief that she belonged in this race. But doubt was creeping into Sarah's mind for the first time. These runners weren't just fast. They were sophisticated in their approach to racing. They seemed to know instinctively when to cover moves, when to position themselves for tactical advantage, when to show strength, and when to conserve energy. Sarah felt like she was learning a new language while trying to speak it fluently. The 800-meter split flashed on the scoreboard. 2:16. Sarah had run 2:18 for 800 meters in her regional victory, and that had been with a furious final kick. Here they were running 2 seconds faster, and nobody looked concerned. The level of competition was beyond what she had prepared for mentally. As they passed the halfway point, Sarah noticed something that both encouraged and worried her. She felt good. Despite the pace, despite the pressure, despite running faster than she ever had before, her body was responding well. Her breathing was controlled, her legs felt strong, and she had the distinct sense that she could handle whatever the race demanded. The problem was that everyone else looked like they felt exactly the same way. Amanda Peterson continued to lead with the same relaxed confidence she had shown from the start. The Portland duo remained in perfect position just behind her. Jessica Chen had moved up to fourth, her positioning suggesting she was ready to make a move whenever the race situation called for it. With 700 meters remaining, Sarah realized that the race was about to change dramatically. The early pace, fast as it had been, was about to get even faster. She could sense it in the way the leaders were positioning themselves, in the slight increase in tension that seemed to ripple through the entire field. Jessica Chen made the first significant move, pulling out into lane 2 and beginning to close the gap on the leaders. It wasn't an explosive surge, but rather a gradual acceleration that immediately changed the rhythm of the race. Suddenly, everyone was forced to respond or risk being left behind. Sarah found herself moving up to 5th place almost automatically, her racing instincts taking over as the tactical situation evolved. She had spent so much time running alone that she sometimes forgot she had good racing sense, an innate understanding of how to position herself for success. The crowd noise increased dramatically as the pace quickened. Sarah could hear individual voices cheering for specific athletes, could feel the energy of several thousand people who sensed that something special was building. The stadium lights seemed brighter, the track faster, everything more vivid than anything she had experienced. With 600 meters to go, Amanda Peterson responded to Jessica's move by increasing her own pace. But instead of the controlled acceleration Sarah had expected, Amanda's response was more desperate than commanding. For the first time, the defending champion looked like she was working hard, like the pace was beginning to exact its toll. This was the moment Coach Henderson had prepared Sarah for, the point in high-level races when fitness mattered more than tactics, when months of training separated the truly prepared from the merely talented. Sarah had logged countless miles on her dirt track, had pushed through barrier after barrier in weather conditions that would have sent other athletes indoors. She was ready for this. With 500 meters remaining, Sarah moved into 4th place, her stride still smooth and controlled, while others around her began to show signs of strain. The two Portland runners, who had looked so composed early in the race, were starting to tie up. Their perfect synchronization was breaking down as individual fitness levels began to assert themselves. Jessica Chen had pulled even with Amanda Peterson, and the two were engaged in a battle that was consuming energy neither could afford with 400 meters still to race. They were dueling with each other instead of racing smart, their competitive instincts overriding their tactical discipline. Sarah moved into 3rd place at the 300-meter mark, and suddenly she could see a clear path to victory. The runners ahead of her were locked in their private battle, neither paying attention to the threat that was emerging from behind. Sarah had learned to be patient in her training, had developed the ability to strike when others were vulnerable. The crowd was on its feet now, sensing that the unknown runner was mounting a charge that could change everything. Sarah could hear Coach Henderson shouting encouragement from somewhere in the stands, his voice mixing with hundreds of others to create a wall of sound that seemed to lift her forward. With 200 meters to go, Sarah pulled into second place. Amanda Peterson, the defending champion, was visibly struggling now, her form beginning to deteriorate under the pressure of maintaining a pace that had proven unsustainable. Jessica Chen was still strong but had expended too much energy in her battle with Amanda. Sarah, meanwhile, felt like she was just hitting her stride. All those solitary miles, all those mornings when she had dragged herself out of bed to run in harsh weather conditions, all those training sessions when Coach Henderson had pushed her beyond what seemed possible, everything was paying off in this moment. The final 100 meters stretched ahead of her like a pathway to everything she had ever dreamed of. Sarah was in second place with room to move, running faster than she had ever run before, feeling stronger than she had any right to feel after covering 1,400 meters at record pace. But as she entered the final straight, Sarah made a discovery that changed everything. She wasn't just running for second place or hoping to stay close to the leaders. She was in position to win, to shock the entire field and claim a state championship that nobody had thought possible. The realization hit her just as she pulled even with Jessica Chen, just as the crowd noise reached a crescendo, just as everything she had worked for came down to the final 50 meters of the most important race of her life. Sarah Martinez, the girl from the dirt track who had been invisible just months before, was about to announce herself in the most dramatic way possible. The finish line beckoned ahead, and with it the chance to prove that sometimes the greatest victories come from the most unexpected places. Everything she had ever dreamed of was just steps away, and Sarah had never felt more ready to claim it. With 50 meters remaining, Sarah Martinez found herself in the lead for the first time in the race. Jessica Chen, the heavily recruited Stanford commit, was struggling to match Sarah's devastating final kick. Amanda Peterson, the defending champion, had faded to fourth place, her season-long dominance crumbling in the face of a pace she couldn't sustain. The crowd was in absolute chaos. Nobody had expected this scenario, least of all the college recruiters who had come to watch established prospects, and were now witnessing the emergence of a completely unknown talent. Sarah's name wasn't even in their notebooks, but they were frantically scribbling down information about the mystery runner who was stealing the state championship. Sarah crossed the finish line 3 steps ahead of Jessica Chen, her arms raised in disbelief as the magnitude of what had just happened began to sink in. The time on the scoreboard made the victory even more stunning. 4:18.34, a new state meet record by over 2 seconds. Coach Henderson reached her first, his weathered face showing a mixture of pride and amazement. He had believed in Sarah's potential, had seen something special in her development, but even he hadn't anticipated this level of breakthrough. Sarah collapsed into his arms, overwhelmed by exhaustion and emotion. "You just ran the 3rd fastest high school 1,500 meters in Oregon history," he whispered in her ear. "And you're just getting started." The media attention was immediate and intense. Reporters who had come to write routine stories about expected winners found themselves with a Cinderella tale that would dominate sports coverage for weeks. Sarah, who had never given an interview before, struggled to find words to describe how she felt. "I just ran my race," she told the growing crowd of journalists. "Coach Henderson taught me to be patient, to trust my fitness, and to believe in myself. I knew I was in good shape, but I had no idea I could run that fast." The questions came rapidly. Where had she been training? Who were her sponsors? What college had she committed to? Sarah's answers revealed just how unlikely her success was. No sponsors, no college commitments, no fancy training facilities, just a dirt track, an old-school coach, and an extraordinary work ethic. Within hours, her phone was buzzing with calls from college coaches who had never heard of her school. Universities that recruited nationally were suddenly interested in the small-town runner who had appeared from nowhere to set a state record. Stanford called first, with Jessica Chen's coach expressing interest in bringing both athletes to Palo Alto. Oregon followed quickly, recognizing that a home state talent of this caliber shouldn't be allowed to leave. Duke, Georgetown, and Providence joined the conversation, each offering full scholarships to an athlete who had been completely unknown 24 hours earlier. But Sarah wasn't ready for those decisions. She was still processing what had happened on the track, still trying to understand how 4 years of anonymous training had led to this moment of statewide recognition. The local media attention was overwhelming for a small town that rarely made headlines. Sarah's high school held an assembly in her honor, with students and faculty celebrating their newly famous alumna. The coffee shop that had put up a congratulatory sign after her regional victory now displayed a much larger banner proclaiming her the state champion. More importantly, young runners from across the region began reaching out to Coach Henderson, asking if they could train with the program that had produced such an unexpected champion. The dirt track that had been Sarah's private sanctuary was suddenly seen as a destination for serious athletes. Sarah's success was transforming not just her own future but the entire culture of distance running in their area. She had proven that excellence could emerge from anywhere, that talent and determination mattered more than perfect facilities or prestigious programs. The weeks following her state championship victory brought opportunities Sarah had never imagined. She was invited to compete in national-level meets, events where she would face the best high school runners from across the country. The prospect was both thrilling and intimidating. Her first national competition came at the Nike Outdoor Nationals in Eugene, ironically back at Hayward Field, where she had claimed her state title. This time, she would be racing against athletes who had been competing nationally for years, runners whose personal bests made her state record look ordinary. The field included defending national champions, runners who had already broken 4:10 for 1,500 meters, athletes who trained at altitude with Olympic-level coaches. Sarah felt the familiar nervousness she had experienced before her state championship, but it was tempered by confidence earned through proven performance. Coach Henderson made the trip with her, providing the steady guidance that had been crucial to her development. He reminded her that fitness didn't disappear overnight, that the speed she had discovered at state championships was real and repeatable. These girls might have better times on paper, he told her as they walked around the track during their pre-race preparation. But times on paper don't win races. Racing does. And you've proven you know how to race. The level of organization at national meets was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Athletes had their own warm-up schedules managed by team coordinators. Equipment managers ensured that spikes were properly prepared and uniforms were perfectly fitted. Sports psychologists offered last-minute mental preparation. Sarah's preparation remained characteristically simple. She followed the same warm-up routine she had used all season, wore the same spikes that had carried her to her state title, and trusted in the fitness that had been built through months of consistent training on her imperfect home track. The race itself was a revelation. The pace from the start was faster than anything Sarah had experienced, even at the state championship. The field was deeper, with quality athletes running in positions that would have won most state meets. Sarah found herself in 8th place after 800 meters, running a split time that would have been a personal best just months earlier. But the lessons from her state championship served her well. She remained patient, trusted her fitness, and waited for her opportunity. With 600 meters remaining, she began moving through the field with the same controlled aggression that had carried her to victory at state. The crowd noise was different at a national meet, more sophisticated and knowledgeable. Fans recognized tactical moves before they developed, appreciated subtleties of racing that casual observers might miss. When Sarah moved into contention with 300 meters to go, the applause was knowing and appreciative. She finished third, running 4:16.89, a time that shattered her own state record and established her as one of the premier prep distance runners in the country. More importantly, she had proven that her state championship wasn't a fluke, that she belonged at the highest level of American high school running. The college recruiting process intensified immediately after nationals. Every major distance running program wanted to add Sarah to their roster, recognizing that she represented both immediate talent and enormous potential for future development. Sarah visited several campuses, experiencing for the first time the world of elite collegiate athletics. The facilities were spectacular. The coaching staffs were composed of former Olympians and world-class athletes, and the training groups included runners who competed for their national teams. But through all the visits and offers, Sarah remained grounded by the lessons Coach Henderson had taught her. Success hadn't changed who she was or where she came from. She was still the girl who loved the simple act of running, who found joy in the rhythm of her footsteps and the feeling of her body moving efficiently across the ground. When she finally made her college choice, selecting Stanford for its combination of academic excellence and distance running tradition, Sarah knew she was embarking on the next chapter of an extraordinary journey. But she also knew that everything she accomplished going forward would be built on the foundation of those early morning runs on a dirt track in small-town Oregon. The girl who had been invisible was now one of the most promising young distance runners in America, but her greatest achievements were still ahead of her, waiting to be claimed through the same dedication and determination that had carried her this far. Sara Martinez was no longer running alone. She was running toward a future filled with possibilities she was just beginning to imagine. 3 years after her high school breakthrough, Sara Martinez stood at the starting line of the NCAA Division I championships as Stanford's team captain and the defending national champion at 1,500 meters. The journey from unknown small-town runner to collegiate superstar had been remarkable, but nothing had prepared her for what was about to happen. The field assembled for the women's 1,500-meter final was the deepest in championship history. Every runner had legitimate aspirations of winning, and several possessed personal bests that would have broken the existing collegiate record. Sarah's own PR of 4:08.23 set earlier that season made her the favorite, but the margin was razor-thin. Among her competitors was Elena Volkov, the defending indoor champion from Arkansas, who had transferred from Russia specifically to challenge for American collegiate records. Her technical expertise and aggressive racing style had already produced victories over several professional athletes in early season competitions. Also in the field was Maria Santos from New Mexico, a senior who had spent her entire collegiate career chasing a breakthrough performance that would secure her spot on the U.S. World Championship team. This would be her final opportunity to achieve the standard she needed. Perhaps most intriguingly, the field included Casey Williams from Oregon, Sarah's former high school competitor Jessica Chen, now representing Duke, and 2 freshmen who had already run faster than Sarah's high school state record time. The pressure surrounding this race was unlike anything Sarah had experienced, even during her historic high school performances. ESPN was broadcasting the meet live, with commentators who had been building anticipation for this showdown for weeks. College track and field rarely received such attention, but the combination of record-breaking potential and compelling storylines had captured the sporting public's imagination. Sarah's preparation had been meticulous. Her Stanford coach, a former Olympian who had guided multiple athletes to professional success, had crafted a training program specifically designed to peak for this moment. Every workout had been calculated to maximize Sarah's natural speed while building the endurance necessary to sustain a record pace. The warm-up felt different from any she had experienced. Sarah's legs possessed a springiness that suggested something special was possible, but she had learned to manage her expectations. Too many great athletes had been undermined by assuming their best performances were inevitable. Coach Henderson had made the trip from Oregon to watch his former athlete compete for the ultimate collegiate prize. Now retired from high school coaching, he spent his time following Sarah's career and mentoring young runners who dreamed of following her path from obscurity to excellence. As Sarah settled into her lane for the pre-race introductions, she caught sight of her mentor in the stands. He was holding the same handmade sign he had carried to her high school state championship, Small Town Speed. The sight of it brought her full circle, reminding her of everything she had overcome to reach this moment. The race setup was perfect for fast times. Pace-setting duties would be handled by a freshman from Colorado who had volunteered to ensure the field went through the opening 800 meters in 2:08, a split that would position everyone to challenge the collegiate record of 4:05.89. When the gun fired, Sarah felt the familiar calm that had marked all of her greatest performances. The pace was aggressive from the first step, but it felt controlled and sustainable. She settled into 4th place as they completed the first 400 meters in 62 seconds, exactly where her race plan called for her to be. The second lap unfolded with tactical precision. The Colorado pacer hit the 800-meter mark in 2:07.8, slightly faster than planned but well within the range that could produce record times. Sarah remained in 4th, with Elena Volkov directly ahead of her and Maria Santos breathing down her neck from behind. With 600 meters remaining, Sarah could sense that something extraordinary was building. Despite the aggressive pace, she felt stronger than she ever had at this point in a race. Months of training at Stanford's altitude training camps and the guidance of world-class coaches had elevated her fitness to levels she had never imagined possible. The Colorado pacer stepped off the track with 500 meters to go, her job complete. Suddenly, Elena Volkov surged to the front, immediately establishing a pace that dropped several runners from contention. Sarah moved into third place, her stride still smooth and controlled despite covering the fastest 1,100 meters of her life. With 400 meters remaining, Sarah made the move that would define her collegiate career. Instead of waiting for the final 200 meters as she had in high school, she pulled into lane 2 and began a sustained drive that immediately separated her from the field. The crowd noise reached levels rarely heard at track meets, as Sarah pulled even with Elena Volkov at the 300-meter mark. The pace was beyond anything either athlete had ever attempted, but neither showed signs of faltering. They were locked in the kind of duel that produces legendary performances. With 200 meters to go, Sarah pulled ahead for the first time. Her stride had the effortless quality that marked truly special athletes operating at their absolute peak. Elena was matching her step for step, but Sarah could sense that she had found another gear, a level of performance that transcended everything she had achieved before. The final 100 meters felt like both an eternity and an instant. Sarah was aware of Elena beside her, aware of the crowd noise, aware that she was running faster than any collegiate woman had ever run before, but her focus was entirely on the finish line and the culmination of everything she had worked toward. She crossed the line with a 2-meter margin of victory, her arms raised in triumph before she even saw the time on the scoreboard. When the numbers flashed, the entire stadium erupted. 4:03. 67, a new collegiate record by over 2 seconds. Sarah collapsed to the track, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just occurred. In 4 minutes and 3 seconds, she had redefined what was possible in collegiate distance running, had announced herself as a legitimate contender for global competition, and had justified every prediction that she would become something special. Coach Henderson reached her first, tears streaming down his face as he embraced the athlete he had discovered on a dirt track in small-town Oregon. "You just ran the 6th fastest 1,500 meters by an American woman ever," he whispered. "You're not just a collegiate champion anymore. You're world-class." The media attention was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah's performance had broken more than just the collegiate record. It had broken into national sports consciousness in a way that track and field rarely managed. Her time would have placed 4th at the previous year's World Championships, immediately establishing her as a contender for the upcoming Olympics. As Sarah sat in the media room answering questions about her record-breaking performance, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From invisible runs on a dirt track to the pinnacle of American collegiate athletics, her story embodied everything that made sport compelling. The triumph of dedication over circumstance, of belief over expectation. The girl who had once been told by skeptical observers to let her try had just shattered one of the most prestigious records in American distance running. But as Sarah fielded questions about her Olympic aspirations and professional opportunities, she knew that this record was not the end of her story. It was simply the beginning of a new chapter. One that would take her places she had never imagined when she first laced up those worn running shoes and headed out onto that imperfect track in Oregon. Sarah Martinez had proven that greatness could emerge from anywhere, and now the entire world would be watching to see how high she could climb. The record-breaking performance that shocked the collegiate track and field world was just the latest chapter in a story that had begun with solitary morning runs and the unwavering belief of a coach who saw potential where others saw only an ordinary small-town girl. Now, as Sarah prepared for the next phase of her career, she carried with her the same determination and humility that had fueled her rise from anonymity to excellence. The dirt track where her journey began had been paved over to create a proper facility, but the lessons she learned there would guide her for the rest of her career. Sarah Martinez was no longer the unknown runner who had surprised everyone. She was now the standard by which others would measure themselves, the athlete who had proven that with enough dedication and the right guidance, any dream was achievable. Her record-breaking run had changed everything, but it had also confirmed what Coach Henderson had seen in her from the very beginning. She was destined for greatness.